So we're gonna start with the only series I've finished, and I love what you said because I guess the fact that this series finished so fast. But Miami Heat, they're already out. we're weekend basically, and they're already been eliminated. They got swept by the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, a lot of different things we could go from here. I know you got a lot to say, so I'm gonna let you go first, just as our jumping point. So yeah, I'm. What are your thoughts in regards to that Heat? At least the Heat, I guess, in that series and what happened.
Well, before I go into it, because I kind of have a little spiel. I mean, you and I were talking about it. Why did the NBA rush this series so fast? Like the fact that this game four was on the same night as like game three of the Wizards Sixers series just felt so weird. But once again, my only rationale there is maybe they thought it would go seven. And so they tried to speed it up so that it wouldn't take too long compared to some of the other series they thought would be sweeps, like the Wizards 76ers. But anyway, why Miami lost? It's I feel like a lot of people are just going to assume that they just played worse, which is true. Because I mean, we even posted on our Instagram the post about the Heat in the bubble and their stats versus this season's playoff stats, which there are some typos in there. But like you can see for like Jimmy Adebayo, Dragic, Hero, like they all have a significant drop in their efficiency, their points, their rebound numbers, assists, whatever it is. There's just big drops there. But I think their issues go a lot deeper, and I think it points to what's going to happen in the offseason because Miami is in a big offseason right now where they have a lot of free agents. Duncan Robinson's a free agent, Dragic, Iguodala, yeah, a lot of their players. I think they pretty much have like Bam, Jimmy, Hero, and Precious Achua under contract. Like everybody else could be gone. Victor Oladipo, I mean, we haven't talked about him in a long time, but he was unhealthy, didn't even get to play for them.
Yeah.
He could potentially leave. So there's a big potential swing with Miami here, and I think they even have enough money to go after a max contract guy if they
Like,
want to. So,
yeah.
uh, but the reason that I think they lost is a lot of the schematic things that made them so good last year, they were not able to do this year, right? I mean, everyone who watched the Heat last year, the three things that their offense were based around was a lot of passing, a lot of cutting, and a lot of off-ball movement, right? I mean, just remembering Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson and just running everywhere and getting around screens and Bam always holding it up top and doing all this passing action. Jimmy Butler cutting back door, just a whole lot of movement that their offense was predicated on, right? But the key there was Jimmy can't shoot, Bam can't shoot. Well, Jimmy can shoot, but he's not very good at
Yeah.
it. Doesn't shoot a lot. His volume is incredibly low.
Yeah.
And Bam he doesn't shoot threes, right? Even mid ranges, he's not that good at it. So, but the key for why their offense worked around that was they always had three shooters on the court at all times, right? That was Dragic, that was Hero, that was Duncan Robinson, Jay Crowder, all those kind of guys. And Jay Crowder specifically, I think, is someone that they're missing a lot because him and Duncan Robinson were shooting a crazy volume of threes last year. I think they were like two of the highest volume 3-point shooters in the entire league, and they were hitting at an insane rate. But this year, they don't have Jay Crowder. They also don't have Kelly Olynyk. They don't have Myers Leonard. Those three guys were their forward slash big men who were shooting, and they replaced them all with like Trevor Ariza, I mean, he's a fine player. He's a decent defender, decent shooter, but he doesn't shoot near at the volume that those kind of guys do. So he doesn't necessarily provide the same floor spacing. So that was a big reason why I think the Heat lost. Also, I mean, even last year, their offense was one of the worst when it came to offensive rebounding and turnovers. I mean, Bam's a great center, but he's not like a big body kind of guy. And with Crowder running the four, they were never going to get a lot of offensive rebounds. I think last year they were like 29th in offensive rebounding. And also, they just turned the ball over a lot because of the off ball movement, all that kind of stuff. Once again, because of all the shooting that they had, it like compensated for all of that stuff. Now, this year, the offensive rebounding hasn't changed. The turnovers hasn't changed. Both of those things are still bad. But now, when you don't have as good of shooting, all of a sudden those things are highlighted a lot more and they're actually costing you games. And when they can't adjust to fix that, they don't have the shooting to back it up. They don't have the high point totals that they're scoring. So those things are going to become a lot more of an issue. And then the final thing that I think the final two things that I think really led to them losing is number one, Milwaukee's defense got way better this year. They added Drew Holiday. I mean, both of us had him on the all defensive first team. Also, unlike last year, Giannis now guarded Jimmy Butler, which we saw Jimmy Butler had a steep decline in numbers. I don't think we'll ever see Jimmy Butler play this worse again because this was his worst playoff series by far since he's like become a star in the league. And I think a large part of that is once again the Bucks. They changed their scheme. They forced Bam Adebayo to shoot mid ranges. They were allowing Jimmy Butler to shoot whatever he wanted because Giannis and Brook Lopez or whoever was guarding Bam, they just camped in the paint and they did not allow them to beat them inside because they knew they don't have these three elite level shooters around them. Even Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, they weren't shooting as well as they were the year before. So they're willing to live with guys on islands out there because they know that if Jimmy and Bam can turn it on, those guys are going to benefit. So they just lived with it and they shut down Bam and Jimmy inside. And then the other thing is the Tyler Herro situation. He went from incredibly overrated to the season that he had this year, which the regular season he actually improved his numbers from the year before. But I think that playoff run and how amazing he was last year, I think set a lot of really high expectations for him. And then he kind of became a celebrity. And there's reports that like Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler are not happy with him because he's focusing less on basketball and more about building his own brand and advertising and like just the things that Miami can offer you as a city, right? And that ends up with this playoff run. He averaged 9 points a game on like 31% shooting from both three and the field, which is pretty horrible. So, and I think the key there too is, a lot of people, remember that they could have had James Harden, but they didn't want to include Tyler Herro. I think the trade was going to be like Herro, Duncan Robinson, Achua, and like 2 first-round picks. And now looking back, that looks like a bargain for a Duncan Robinson who's going to be on a contract year, probably getting 20 plus million because of how good he is at shooting. Tyler Herro, who didn't, he got worse this postseason. And then a couple first-round picks and another young guy who's not a playoff contributor yet. I don't know. I think the Heat's issues are pretty big. And I think that a lot of people are just going to chalk it up to, well, they just played worse. But I think it comes back to their scheme. It comes back to Milwaukee getting better. But it also comes back to they just don't have the actual talent to play the way that they wanted to play this year as opposed to last year. And there's also the fan aspect. I mean, Tyler Herro, this is his second year in the league. First year, he had no fans in the stands. This year, he's going to Milwaukee with almost full capacity crowd. So
yeah, obviously, I agree with mostly what you said, and I do want to bring up a few other things though. You made the post about it too, about how the teams that got the last 4 teams in last year's playoffs, they all had different issues, and yeah, it definitely seems like the Heat shortened on. We saw them; they started really slow this season, and they had to really, and maybe they had to really pick it up at the end. And maybe that's for another reason why they're just burnt out. Like they basically only had about a month, 2 months for an off season, and especially and start with Tyler Herro. I see the potential, and I kind of understand why they didn't trade. I mean, obviously in hindsight, it's better to look back now and see that they didn't trade Harden for Harden, or they should have traded for Harden. But yeah, I mean, didn't really have an off. Once again, Herro didn't really have an off season to continue to improve his game. Meanwhile, other teams could game plan, and then at times too, don't mind my dog. At times too, like I mentioned at the beginning of the season, Jimmy was out, and then he was shouldered with more responsibility this year. On top of that, so maybe those were contributing factors. But I do think, like you said, mainly the point of they lost a lot of people, key pieces, and that really hurt them. On top of, so now they had to figure out how to get these new pieces in. The rookies, maybe other guys that they traded for. I mean, Iguodala was a late season acquisition last year, and especially at this point in his career, not a great shooter. So, yeah, and I think too, like you mentioned, Bam not really being willing to shoot, and especially Jimmy, because Jimmy's the weird one to me because we saw about 2 years ago when he got traded to Philly, those first 2 games, he I think the first two, maybe not the first two, but like one of the first few games, he had two games where he hit like a game-winning three. Like, I think the ones against Charlotte, and so I don't know if you remember, like when he was with the Bulls, he would drop 50, and even with the Timberwolves, he averaged I think in the 20s. So, and like from what I see, nothing's terrible about his shooting motion. So yeah, like I don't know if that's something that he needs to go into this offseason and rework or regain his confidence, because yeah, it was just a surprise to see Jimmy Butler so hesitant to shoot the three, shoot the mid range. Because I mean, granted, his defense and his efforts would has always been his strong point, but that's something that pushed him to the next level, made him a star in Chicago, and then to Minnesota and then Miami. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what happened with the Heat. Do like you mentioned, I think they do have a max slot. They had one open last season. They're hoping to get somebody. I think they're trying to get Gallinari. I think they're. It sounded like they're really hoping to get Gallinari, because I don't know if you remember last trade deadline, they were trying to get that trade with OK, because Gallinari was in OKC then. They're trying to get that done, and it fell through. I think they didn't want. I think it's kind of the same issue with Harden. They didn't want to give up too much for Gallinari. Well, Gallinari in the offseason, maybe they're expecting that they'd have a foot in the door, but hey, he goes to Atlanta instead, and then they lose Jay Crowder, lose all those guys you mentioned, and they don't really bring in anyone else new except for Oladipo, who once again I think we both like that acquisition, but then he had the season-ending injury, and then now he's a free agent. So once again, who knows if he'll stay or go. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what they do, see what happens. Maybe they revisit the Bradley Beal trade, because the Wizards could be looking to restructure things, and maybe that's when they give up Hero, kind of push more chips in the table, and then get a few other guys. But we'll see what happens with them. But yeah, I think
I will say too, the Oladipo one I think is one of the more underrated parts of why they lost, because they traded Avery Bradley, they traded Kelly Olynyk. I mean, these aren't like, it was clear they won the trade, right? But these are important contributors that Avery Bradley opted out last season, so we didn't get to see him in the bubble. But Kelly Olynyk, once again, he provided that floor spacing, things that just made their scheme work. Obviously, Myers Leonard had his whole situation, and so they got rid of him. He went to OKC, and then I think he got cut after that. And then Jay Crowder just left in free agency. So the if they had Oladipo, things might have been different. I think obviously they were still the 7th seed or the 6th seed for a reason. Milwaukee was supposed to win this series. Even me, I picked Miami to win this. And so I was pretty shocked at how everything went down, just because I figured, hey, this is a similar team, but even I was overlooking just the pieces that made the thing work, right? It's almost like the defensive tackle in football. They don't get a lot of credit, they don't get a lot of love, but they make a lot of the behind the scenes, the guys who are the stars, they make it all work for those dudes by filling the right holes, by just making the right play. In the Heat situation, Jay Crowder just taking the right shots. These guys just providing floor spacing for the other dudes that they were lacking this year. And because Victor Oladipo was supposed to be the guy that was replacing all of that production and not having him, it's just they were not the same. And it definitely sucks for Miami, but they are in a good spot to where if they want to go full rehaul, they can do it.
Yeah, and we know that they still have enough foundation pieces with Jimmy and Bam that it can work. So we'll have to see what
and
they
people want to play with Jimmy Butler too. That's a big thing.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think like I mentioned, as long as Jimmy works on his shot, maybe Tyler has an off season to work on some things, get his confidence back, and like I said, we'll see what they do contract wise, because they got a lot of guys that could go out, and so a lot of holes potentially to fill again.